of the things that I really like the most about you is your experimentation. Your talk at COSI last year, the conference in 2024 was all about self-experimentation. We talked about that on our last podcast episode. It was fascinating. You always seem to have something going on. And this latest one is around a cereal. You'll be happy to know that this cereal is Ben Bickman's absolute favorite cereal to eat. And I told him on my show, like, that is objective science, not true. This is the first time ever that opinion is wrong. Like, shredded wheat is not the best cereal, and he insists that it is the best cereal ever. And I think, God, that's so gross. Tell us about your shredded wheat experiments.
Well, Ben, I hope you listen to this. So
he's an avid listener. He's a listener of Boundless Body for sure.
Good. So in the U.S. dietary guidelines, it recommends that we eat whole grains, right? And whole grain products. I always hated that definition because nobody effing eats a whole grain. Nobody. We don't. We eat processed grains. Maybe it had the whole grain initially when it got all ground up, but it got all ground up, which makes it really, really absorbable. So in the U.S. dietary guidelines, it says eat whole grains like plain shredded wheat without added sugar. And it even has a picture of it. It says shredded wheat. This is a healthy thing that you should be eating. In the American Diabetes Association guidelines, it says something very similar. You know, if you're diabetic, a quarter of your plate should have carbs on it. And those carbs should include things like whole grains and whole grain products. Well, I thought, how about I go test this myself? So I went and bought a box of shredded wheat cereal, and it's just plain. It had no additives. It was whole grain wheat and vitamin E or tocopherols, right, to preserve freshness. So I had that with a healthy, serving of fat-free milk. I did this for science.
Oh, you wouldn't have done it for taste. I'll tell you that.
God, no. So I had 2 servings of the cereal. I think it was 60 grams per serving. So I had 120 grams of it because nobody eats 1 serving of cereal, right? This is more of a real world experience.
Never in the history of cereal has anybody eaten 1 serving of cereal.
Yeah, one serving is however much fits in the bowl without overflowing, right? That's the serving.
Of course. and debatable, how big is your bowl? Mine were like popcorn size.
Exactly. Yeah, remember as a kid, I could polish off a giant bowl of like Cinnamon Toast Crunch and be as happy as a clam, right? The entire time. So I decided to have 120 grams of this. I had about 240 grams of the fat-free milk, and I suffered for several minutes eating this garbage. I don't know. I mean, Ben, really? It's like wet cardboard. I mean, maybe that flavor is appealing to you, but it was not to me. So I suffered through this bowl of healthy shredded wheats, healthy whole wheat cereal with no added sugar, and my glucose went from 94 to 227.
Goodness.
In the span of 30 minutes. A lot of people don't realize this. And this is this goes back to my talk last year and kind of the thing that I've started focusing on more and more, because I let all the other people get into the lipids and fat and calories in, calorie out. I let people focus on that. I focus on glucose because all of the patients I see, all the chronic disease patients, I can look through their history. Their lipids will be all over the place. LDL will be high, low, HDL high, low, triglycerides high, low, all over the map. I almost always see high glucose somewhere in there. And I will see stroke patients that have normal LDL. They're on statins. Usually their HDL is low, and usually their triglycerides are high, or they've had like a, past history of HDL of like 35 and triglycerides of 250. I see that all the time. But their LDL will often be low, and they'll be on statins, but they're still having an event. Their glucose is high. it's no surprise that diabetes is the number one risk factor for strokes and heart attacks and a whole host of other things and just death in general. But people seem to think that I'm not diabetic, so that's not my problem. Well, if me as a fit, lean individual eats a bowl of healthy shredded wheat that is recommended by both the US dietary guidelines and the American Diabetes Association, and my glucose goes into the 200s, I am not the only one this is happening to. And the vast majority of people are consuming things that are doing this to their glucose on a daily basis.
All day, not
all
just daily,
day.
like all day.
Multiple times a day, they're doing this. And your A1C can stay normal. You can even stay relatively fit and lean. I've never been fat. I've always been pretty lean and muscular. But my glucose goes just skyrockets when I eat very highly absorbable carbohydrates. And a lot of the, I think in the keto community, we're kind of aware of, glucose being a problem. We try to keep our glucose and our A1C low and all that. But this actually doesn't get that much attention, which really surprises me. Like the whole idea of low carbohydrates is, oh, we keep my carbs low and I lose weight and all this, and I feel better and I have less inflammation. My arthritis feels better. I have less brain fog. Well, what's causing those things? It isn't quote unquote carbohydrates. It's hyperglycemia that's causing tons of inflammatory problems frequently on a daily basis for people. A lot of times they don't actually feel it. And nobody's looking for it. And the CGM technology is relatively new. So practically nobody's using them. I've gotten several people in the ER that I work at to start using them, and they are, kind of getting blown away. These people who, snack on gummy worms and things like that and see their glucose go into the 200s and, are blown away by it. But again, they have normal A1C. Maybe they have a little bit of a belly, but they don't think anything of it. And every single time you raise your glucose that high, you are causing vascular damage, period. Full stop. Every study shows this. Some people argue on the exact level of concentration where this happens. Basically, every study shows, but over 180, it's for sure happening. Several studies showing above 140 to 180, there's definitely some degree of endothelial or damage to the inside lining of your arteries. And it is happening on a daily basis for the vast majority of the population. Everything that we look at in our weirdo nutrition nerd community, we're always looking at, oh, well, like I said earlier, triglyceride to HDL ratio. Oh, well, that's a big sign of, that's a big risk factor for heart disease. Your metabolic syndrome criteria is a big risk factor. LPIR score, all these different things. Insulin, fasting insulin. All of these are related to hyperglycemia. If you are genetically predisposed to it, you have that problem from the start, right? For me, like my metabolic numbers are actually great, but I shoot really high when I eat something. So I have the genetics are basically lending me to hyperglycemia whenever I eat carbohydrates. However, if you don't have genetics like mine, like my wife, she eats something and like she can eat, drink a lemonade or eat a croissant and her glucose goes up to like 140, which is high for her because she tends to be in the 70s. But if you develop insulin resistance over time, those spikes go higher and higher and higher. If you gain weight, if you repeatedly expose, because every time you spike your glucose high, your insulin has to chase that. You become insulin resistant over time. That's why most people over time develop some sort of insulin resistance and hyperglycemic episodes. It gets worse as you get older. And we get more sedentary as you get older. And if you have less muscle mass and you're more sedentary, you're then likely to have higher glucose spikes. Every time your glucose spikes, particularly over 180, you are stripping your glycocalyx, which protects your blood vessels from clotting, from actually from LDL. And this is where I said in my talk last year, I don't think LDL is innocent. I think it is corrupted by hyperglycemia. We know it. We know hyperglycemia modifies LDL. We know it oxidizes and glycates it. And we know those modified particles contribute to atherosclerosis. When your glucose goes really high, not only do you strip your glycocalyx, which protects that endothelial layer, the single cells that line the inside of your arteries, but it actually damages those cells. It reduces the ability of those cells to actually heal. So what are called endothelial progenitor cells, which are basically float around in your bloodstream and find these spots of damage and help to heal that area. They latch onto spots where there's damage to endothelium and they help heal it. Hyperglycemia will reduce your endothelial progenitor cells by half just from one episode of it. Wow. It's known to cause clotting immediately. So if your glucose goes up to 180, actually even over 150, you will have increased prothrombin fragments, and your D dimer will go up, which means like microclotting is literally happening in your arteries. This is why the vast majority of the time someone comes in, with a stroke, they're hyperglycemic. If your blood glucose goes high, it causes clotting. It's not that it might cause clotting. It does cause clotting. It just depends on how big that clot is and how well your body is able to break it up before it causes a problem. Again, this is happening to most Americans every single day, and nobody realizes it.
And that it was so well explained. And this is why I love your work so much and all the experimentation you do and trying to get this message out there. I just have to say how disappointed I am. We have been working so hard for years and years to get Shredded Wheat as a sponsor of Boundless Body Radio. Been working on that relationship, and in one fell swoop, we just completely lost them as a potential sponsor. So that's going to have some financial repercussions around here. But thank you very much for eating gross, soggy, cardboard tasting cereal in the name of science to help prove some of your points.